We're going to make it so we can actually do a lot more with our chatbot. We want to add a bunch of functionality to it. And so one of the things we need to do is we need to go inside our panel. We need to add buttons so that each of the different things we want to see happen has a button that's appropriate for it. And of course, then add the listeners to it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and in our import section, we're going to add an import for java.awt.gridLayout. That layout is one of the layout tools that allows us to put things together in a resizable grid as necessary. And so we want to make sure we're going to be using that first. Then we want to go ahead and add buttons for each of the different things we're working with inside our project. So we're going to go ahead and add a whole bunch of buttons. As you can see right here, I have them listed for tech, joke, random, encouraging, Java, mythical, fortune, current events. These are the topics we used inside our chatbot. They were the public methods that we used to actually verify and work with and get topics from earlier. And you'll see that in one of the other videos as well. We want to go ahead and declare data members for each of them. And then we also want to make sure we add a panel to hold them later on. So we have a private JPanel button box that's going to be working with that as well. Then, of course, we're going to go through and initialize each of those buttons. Again, I like to use the same process where I go through and I use the same declaration structure. I go through and initialize in the same order, so I have the buttons also declared and initialized at the same time. That way I can make sure I don't skip anything. And so if I use that same order, it's a great way to make sure I didn't skip anything as I work through it. Then I want to initialize my button box to be a new JPanel, passing it a grid layout. Now with the grid layout, it has two parameters we send to it as the constructor. The first parameter is the number of rows. The second parameter is the number of columns. And what I'm doing right here is I'm setting I want 1 row and 0 columns. And what that does, it says I want 1 row of buttons, but I want it to be able to have as many spaces for those buttons as necessary. So however many buttons I add to this, boom, and they automatically fit. It's a really cool way to do some menu building. It's a great tool for doing that. Then what we need to do is we need to go ahead and go to our setup panel, and just like we do with our lovely scroll pane, we want to make sure that we add our button just like we did with our scroll pane where we put the text area inside the pane that could scroll for that. We want to do the same kind of thing with our button box. And so in buttonbox.add, for each of those new buttons that I put inside there, so buttonbox.add, passing each of those components, and then I add the button box to my panel. So that way I can have the button box inside there. So I have a box that holds all the buttons, and I'm putting that box then inside the panel. And this is a great way to handle menu building, especially when you want to handle all the associated components inside one single file like we're doing right here inside our chat panel. So that's what we do for that. The next thing we have, of course, is we need to go to our setup layout. And our setup layout is what we use our lovely little layout manager right here where I assigned it so I can have the layout on there. And I click on my button box, and I wanted to assign my constraints to it so I can specify that where it's going to be. And so I made it so it's going to be below my chat button right here. And so I said it's south edge of the north edge of the button box. South edge of the button box is negative 100 away from the floor of that. And then my button box, its north edge is 10 away from the south edge of that button. So I have a nice little gap between that as well. And then my south edge of my button box right here is 25 away from the bottom of the screen, so I can keep a nice little structure for that. As you can see, that button box has all my buttons inside it, and they automatically just right in there. It looks really, really nice. And again, if I take a look at the actual code for that inside my setup layout method, where I handle all that code, I go down here to setup layout, Schlorp. And as you can see, I've got my button box right here. It's 10 away from the south edge of the chat button, and it's 0 aligned with both the east and west edges like I've been doing for everything so far. And then its south edge is negative 25 away from the south edge of the panel, so it goes up from the bottom on that. And that's a great way to make that happen, and so we can have that functionality. Then inside our setup listeners, I need to add a listener for each of those different buttons, and I'm going to use it so I can send information to my lovely little chatbot controller so I can get that information and go through it. And we're going to update it so that when we send information to that, we're going to send, instead of just having a single parameter right here and interact with chatbot like I have like this, I'm going to adapt this method right here. So my update display takes a string input as well as an int parameter. And then based on the int parameter, I'll send that to the interact with chatbot method. And we'll see that as we go and work with that here in a bit. But that's the basic structure we use to make sure that I have a panel that works with buttons, and we can go from there. Our next step that we need to do is we need to make listeners for each of the different buttons that we have inside our button box. You can see that I have them all right here. They're all collapsed down because I don't need to actually do anything with them. They're just quick little stubs though. They don't have anything inside them yet. They're just listeners that we're using for all that. And again, you always want to start by making stubs first, then add your features and functionality later. That way you always have a functional piece of programming. You don't have to worry about errors happening as you go along. Then we want to change our update display method. Our update display method needs to have a change that reflects the fact we're changing how we're interacting with our chatbot. And we previously had it so interactive chatbot just took a string parameter, but now we want to make sure that when we call our chatbot, we send information based on which button we're working with. And so that's where we're going to come over here. And so I'm going to have my update display is going to take a parameter of a string input as well as a selection. And so my default button, I'm going to send a value of 10 because it's off this grid. It's something we haven't been using before. And then each of these buttons right here, it's going to reflect back to what we're working with inside our actual thing, inside our actual chatbot. So it can send the information, so it can call the appropriate information vis-a-vis the controller when we hit there. And we'll go ahead and see how that works in just a minute in another video. But as you can see right here, I have my string text as the chat field.getText. I then call my update display, passing it that text value, and then 10 for that default. And we'll be adjusting that for each of these different buttons we have right here. That comes over here to our update display method. And inside here, I have my string input and my int selection. And my response is going to go to my controller, talk to the interact with chatbot method, passing both that input and that selection so it can build the appropriate response from that. It's going to append that value to the chat area as well as the response as well, and then set the text field back to blank because we want to make sure it's blank when we get back into it so we can keep typing and having a cool interaction with the chatbot. We'll go ahead and take a look at that and how it works in our other video, but this is just the basic idea of how to update the GUI to make sure that works with that. Again, make sure you're committing often and using that with your branch structure that we have that on the different branch. Thanks again, cheers, and have a great day. Bye-bye.